That sounds perfect.
Derek!
Hey, Derek.
Hello. Now you get to see what my office in Mount Vernon looks like. This is also my HVAC closet and my network room.
Oh,
Okay, friends, coming to
I
you
was
live from
about
the
to-
community room, just making another quick announcement. It sounds like Chairman Dwight Thompson is getting ready to be promoted right now, and we're going to start the recording in about 30 seconds, but I will wave to you so you know that we're here.
okay, he's here. Oh my God, that picture of Dwight.
I've been down in California with my sick brother, so I sort of missed the announcement. I apologize to everyone. So, I think we do have a quorum. Yes, we do. So I call the Planning Commission meeting for August 2nd, 2022 to order. The first item is public comments. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission meeting. Oops. It's on my, okay, there we go. In this forum, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to listen. We will hear from our virtual guests. If you are online, which you have to be, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address comments to the chair and the city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all, community members must limit each speaker time to 3 minutes. Please state your name and city of residence for the record and keep your comments to the allotted time, which is 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time except by express approval of the presiding officer. Screen sharing is not allowed. You may and can submit materials to the Planning Commission or clerk in advance. Materials submitted after the meeting will be provided to the commission for the next meeting. Please do not comment on pending development projects on which the Planning Commission or City Council will make future decisions, as those are quasi-judicial matters, and the planning commissioners and council members must limit their communications about such matters. This meeting is being recorded, and thank you for taking the time to express your comments. Madam Clerk.
We have no on-site commenters and currently no hands raised.
Okay, last chance to raise your hands, ladies and gentlemen.
I see one hand raised, Stacy Valenzuela.
There we go.
One moment while we promote you to panelist.
Stacy.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Word,
Yes.
thank you for joining us, and you may begin. We hear you.
Thank you. Stacy Valenzuela Kenmore. I just couldn't let this go by because we have brought up to the council many times about the bulb corners and how they stick into traffic. They cause the person driving to go about a foot to a foot and a half into the oncoming lane. And it was said by the traffic engineer that that's no problem. We think going slow and causing a car to go into the opposite directions lane is a huge safety issue, as well as does not follow common sense whatsoever. There's even discussion more today because on 68th Avenue, the islands that they're putting in, at the same time, they're having 86 new townhouses on one side of 68th and 286 new family size houses coming in. So we were already concerned with the amount of traffic coming to 68th in that area. And now it's being compounded by streets to make you go slower when you have parking on both sides, you have kids crossing the street, and now you have bulb corners too. Lots of fun. So if you could do anything at all in regards to suggestions of keeping Kenmore a safer city to drive, walk, and ride your bikes, which it is possible and has been possible in many areas, and adding the sidewalk. I know what we're being told is that they passed new laws that you have to have at least a minimum of 5 to 8 feet on the sidewalk, plus a bike lane, plus a barrier, plus this. And the bulbs were supposed to fix the barrier portion, which if there are just metal bars to protect the pedestrians, rather than a bulb going out to cause traffic to go into the opposite lane. And then the discussion also came up, and we know we fought the big bulb on 184th, that they said it was because there was a handicap ADA issue on the other side. The fire trucks could not even turn on that street. So the talk was, what about the snow plows? Are the snow plows being tested to make sure they can make it safely through these areas with the big islands? So this is big issues to discuss. We don't want any car accidents. We don't want anybody getting harmed, but we need to think smart and do things with common sense. And I know you guys have been great on so many issues. I really appreciate that you guys really think things through and really listen to several different opinions. Thanks again for everything you do.
Thank you, Stacy, for your time and your comments tonight. We appreciate that. Madam Clerk, do we have any other hands being raised?
I see no other hands at this time.
Okay, so that'll be the end of public comments. The next item on our agenda is the Planning Commission meeting minutes of July 19th, 2022. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, unless there's an objection, the meeting minutes for July 19th are adopted unanimously. Our next item is the transit-oriented development regulations, which of course we have a staff memo for our esteemed Lori to discuss before we move ahead, unless Debbie is doing this for her. I don't see Lori hanging on. No, Debbie's saying, no, I'm not.
No, I was going to say Laurie isn't here this evening, so it's just me this evening, and I won't be here on the 16th. It will be just Laurie. But tonight we're talking about the transportation element, and I don't have a lot to say other than to turn this over to John Vicente, the engineer, who can introduce Alicia and Rachel, who are the consultants helping with the update of the transportation element.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. As Debbie said, I'm John Vicente, the city engineer, taking the lead on the transportation element update for the comp plan. And as we've introduced before, we've got Alicia McIntyre with Parametrics and her cohort, Rachel Durham, who will be providing an update to you on policies and objectives. So take it away, Alicia.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Planning Commission. Thanks for having us back. Last time we were here was at the end of June talking to you about concurrency. So this evening we're here to present the first draft of the updated transportation element. Chair Thompson, if it's okay with you, my plan this evening was to give a presentation that goes over the entirety of the element. I know this is the first time this group is seeing it. And go through it, talk about some of the really major changes. And then once we're done with that, turn it back over to you to facilitate the discussion, however you may think is the most efficient way to do that. If you'd like to kind of pause between slides and dive into some details, we're prepared to do that as well. So I just wanted to know what your preference was.
Well, unless there's an objection, we'll just continue with what you suggested.
Okay.
And that I would suppose that if there's a question along the line, I know that our commissioners are very assertive and they'll raise their hand and you can feel free to answer their questions.
I'm going to ask, because of the way this is going to present, I'm not going to be able to see anyone raising their hands. So please just interrupt me if that turns out to be the case and someone has a question or something I need to pause.
I will be happy to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And before I go any further, as John mentioned, I've got Rachel Durham here. She's a planner also with Parametric. She's been my right hand in helping put this all together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me. I am not as familiar with using Zoom. I'm more of a Teams person. So hang on just one second. There we go. Keep getting this funny pop-up that says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I'm giving this a try. Am I doing something wrong?
Rita will take care of you momentarily.
Okay.
Yes, give us just 1 second here while we troubleshoot.
Thank you.
Magical clerk. She has a wand down there and she just whaps it and it just gets done.
That's been my experience. It's something of that nature.
Okay, do you want to give it another try?
Sure. Ooh, this is looking a little more promising.
Great.
Ah,
All right. Okay. So again, we're here this evening to talk about the transportation element update. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the transportation element, give you an overview of it in its entirety, and then we'll talk a little bit about some major changes that are part of this update. And then I'll dive in a little bit deeper and talk about the element on a section by section basis, give you an overview of some next steps, and then talk a little bit about what the anticipated public engagement process is. So just from a really high level, the purpose of the transportation element, it reflects and supports the recently adopted land use element. And it provides goals, objectives, and policies that support Kenmore's vision as a high capacity transit community with an activated and thriving downtown. The policies and the goals support multimodal travel by all modes: bicycle, walking, rolling, transit, and automobiles. The transportation element also supports the city's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, and it also reflects the goals in the climate action plan. And the transportation element is divided into 6 sections: the introduction, existing conditions, goals, objectives, and policies, talks about the future transportation system, and then also near-term and long-term capital projects, and then implementation strategies. Tonight and first meeting in September on the 6th, we're going to focus on these first 4 bullets, the first 4 sections, and then we'll continue this discussion talking about projects and implementation strategies primarily in November, a little bit in January, and then we are scheduled to wrap up and have a public hearing in February. One major consideration for the Planning Commission is that unlike some of the other elements in the comprehensive plan, the current transportation element was developed as a separate transportation plan, like a transportation master plan, that was subsequently integrated into the comprehensive plan in 2015. And as a result, it had a different organizational format than some of the other elements in the comprehensive plan. It had a little bit of a different structure. It had some elements that aren't similar to those in the rest of the plan. So in this case, rather than do a strikeout underlined version of the element, which would have been very, very messy, in this case, we're presenting one to you that is essentially a wholesale, would be procedurally a wholesale repeal of the existing transportation element and then adoption of this new one. So we are going to try and give you a lot of the details as far as what you might otherwise see in the standard strikeout, underline, and highlight format. As we continue through this process, when we come to you next month, you will see that strikeout, underline, highlight format to help track the changes that you've discussed with us and asked us to make. So we'll be using that format moving forward. But for today, the draft that you see, you can consider wholesale repeal and then wholesale adoption of this new version. So the really major changes on a very high level across the element really do focus on prioritizing non-motorized mobility, bicycle and pedestrians throughout the transportation network. Again, really supporting and emphasizing Kenmore as a high capacity transit community. This was not envisioned in 2015. There are some changes to the names of roadway types to better align with federal designations. The naming convention in the existing element is just different than federal designations and causes some procedural challenges associated with always having to do the crosswalk between how they're currently designated and what the federal designations are. We also added some draft standards for structured parking facilities to better align with the city's vision for downtown. The plan includes some goals, objectives, and policies to discuss new and evolving technologies for issues including stormwater management, micromobility, and electric vehicles. There's also support for expanded transit service in Kenmore, including planned changes to the regional transit network, the Stride BRT service that is coming along 522, and also discussion of potential implementation of water taxi service. And then finally, additional new policies and plans that talk about recently adopted city plans and policies, such as the ADA transition plan, the pedestrian facilities plan, and the climate action plan. Also, right now, there are 6 goals in the transportation element, and this update includes 2 new goals. I'll get into those details a little bit later, but they include new goal 7, which discusses promoting equity in the planning and implementation of transportation services and infrastructure. And then goal 8, which discusses investments to minimize, mitigate, and respond to the effects of climate change. So now moving into section by section. So the first section is the introduction to the element. It describes the purpose of the transportation element and also sets the regional context, including a discussion of what the Growth Management Act has to say about transportation policies, and the transportation element discusses Vision 2050, the Puget Sound Regional Council long-range vision for the region, discusses the countywide planning policies, and then talks about plans by other agencies that impact the city of Kenmore, including those implemented by WSDOT, the Washington State Department of Transportation, Sound Transit, and King County Metro. So some of the major changes that you'll see in this section is that discussion about Growth Management Act and countywide planning policies, and then also updates that talk about the most recent versions of ST3 and Metro Connects. So then the next section of the element is the existing conditions section. And that section provides a transportation network overview, existing conditions, where are there different kinds of facilities, bicycle lanes, sidewalks, trails, talks about transit service. And then it also talks about what are the current challenges that the city is experiencing for transportation services. And we talk about bicycle and pedestrian safety being one of them, transit availability, and then also limited non-motorized connectivity throughout the city. And then we also talk about in this element, in this section, trends that are going to influence how the transportation vision is developed for the future. And it does talk about transportation related climate impacts, downtown development, as well as broader regional growth. And within this section, the major changes really do update all the different improvements that have been made in the last 7 years since the last update, new sidewalks, new bicycle facilities. It also talks about any previous changes to roadway classifications. Those are incorporated. We talk about transit service and ridership, talk about Kenmore as a high capacity transit community. Also, again, that emphasis on non-motorized connectivity and climate change, and then also discussing the city as a countywide growth center. That transportation network overview talks about travel patterns, the roadway classifications, and then all of the modal conditions that I just mentioned. In addition to pedestrian, bicycle, and transit, it does talk about freight. From the transit network perspective, this might be a little bit, I don't know if confusing is the right word or may seem a little bit strange, but you'll see in that section that it describes the network both through the lens of the 2019 network, as well as the current conditions, which current meaning fall 2021. And the reason we did that in particular is because, as I'm sure you all know, transit ridership took a pretty heavy hit during the COVID pandemic, and it is starting to return. Ridership is starting to return, but it's nowhere near what it was prior to the pandemic. And we wanted to make sure that when we talk about existing conditions, it really does paint a picture that explains that transit was a very desired and highly utilized service in the city of Kenmore. The park and ride usage is a strong indicator of that. Your ridership at the stops in the city also indicate that. And with your vision to become a high capacity transit community, we wanted to really emphasize that the city does, that the residents do use transit. It is a desired service. So that's why you can see a couple of different conditions described in that section of the plan. We know that the actual adoption of this section is likely to occur in 2024. So there may be a desire to update those existing conditions as you get closer to that adoption, particularly if conditions, I'll say, normalize or start to maybe reflect pre-COVID ridership levels. In that same vein, talking about the future adoption of the element, the existing conditions also include several projects that are anticipated to be completed at the time of the adoption. So you might look at some of the projects and say that that's not done yet, but it is looking at it through the lens of it is anticipated to be completed at that time. So we were kind of skipping a step so we didn't have to go through multiple iterations of, say, map updates. Also, you see in the existing conditions how the auto network is performing. And this harkens back to Ria's presentation at the end of June, where she talked about a level of service and concurrency. So you'll see some information about traffic volumes in the city, as well as how intersections are performing in that level of service lens. And then, as I mentioned, sections that talk about the current challenges, as well as trends that are going to affect how the system develops in the future. And so kind of diving in now to the real heart of the element, the goals, objectives, and policies. So as I mentioned, there are 8 goals in this draft. The first 6 are They're pretty much the same. There was some language changing, but for all intents and purposes, they are very similar to what they were before. So the first goal talks about Kenmore having a comprehensive multimodal network. It describes development and maintenance of the city's layered network. The graphic on the right is meant to illustrate the concept of the layered network, which is described in the future vision. But in short, you can see that this layered network is the concept of thinking about all the modal uses, bikes, pedestrians, transit, freight delivery, and autos, and thinking about how they all operate within the context of the city, and then having a transportation network that accommodates all of those uses in the appropriate locations with appropriate street classifications. That's the very high level description of the layered network, and it's been in place since 2015 with the adoption of the existing element. This goal also talks about having a transportation network that's consistent with the community vision, describes safety, talks about level of service, and then also review and monitoring of the system. The major changes that are in here describe a greater emphasis on non-motorized modes and transit, some updated vehicular level of service and street classifications. Also talking some more with some updates to the green and yellow level of service standards for bicycles and pedestrians that we talked about at Ria's presentation in June. So the second goal discusses local, regional, state, and federal coordination, how the city supports WSDOT. Sorry, I keep saying that, the Washington State Department of Transportation and transit agencies. Talks about cooperation with neighboring cities, regional improvements that are compatible with the city vision, discussion of working with the private sector to develop elements of the transportation network, and then also some technological innovations. And from this perspective, the major changes really are alignment with the updated land use element, particularly regarding downtown development, parking, and then that designation as a high capacity transit community. And then also from the technological side, talking about evolving technology and micromobility. Is everyone familiar with the term micromobility? I keep saying it. And so do I need to describe that or jump into that definition a little bit more?
Yes, please.
Sure. So micromobility really does talk about, as you can probably imagine, small ways of getting around. So really looking at scooters, bicycles, those a lot of times micromobility is really thought of as ways to go short distances. It's definitely not cars, and it's not transit from that perspective. So what we're really talking about when we discuss that are these smaller forms of transportation. A lot of times they're really thought of through the lens of shared mobility as well, such as scooter rentals or bike rentals. So the third goal in the draft element talks about fiscal and environmental sustainability, with an emphasis on community priorities, the annual process to develop the transportation improvement program, securing sufficient funding for improvements, and also concurrent improvements, again, talking about concurrency. It also talks about regional coordination to mitigate air quality impacts, and then also policies to reduce water quality impacts. So those last two in particular, addressing air and water quality, are major changes. Goal number 4 talks about encouraging travel other than single occupancy vehicles through expansion of transit service, siting and sizing of park and ride facilities, accessible sidewalk and trail network, implementing the bicycle priority network, and then also programs and regulations to reduce single occupancy vehicle use. So the changes here really focus on policies supporting the vision for as an HCT community, high capacity transit community, and then references to the ADA transition plan and the recently adopted pedestrian facilities plan. Goals 5 and 6, for those elements, there really are no major changes to those. The goal 5 discusses maintenance of safe air travel services, including supporting continued operation of the air harbor planned uses or activities near the air harbor to minimize impacts, and then compliance with noise and safety standards. And then goal 6 discusses facilitation of freight mobility, including support for efficient movement of goods, and then accommodating local deliveries. And then these are the 2 new goals that I had mentioned earlier. Goal 7, describing equity in transportation services and infrastructure. And you'll see objectives and policies that really talk about developing projects that provide equitable access and benefits to all residents. And then also promoting inclusive and affordable services. And then goal 8 talks about minimizing, mitigating, and responding to the effects of climate change. So balancing demands with sustainable growth targets, and then also a reduction of vehicle miles traveled for automobiles. And then we move on to the next section of the plan, that is the future transportation system. And this is where we really get into a description of that layered network. You also have, in addition to the element itself, Appendix D3. And that is a summary with some example cross sections for the roadway typologies that are described in the element. The future transportation also talks about bicycle and pedestrian safety, the vision for modal networks, as well as limited non-motorized connectivity. And then we talk a little bit about trends as well. And again, that Appendix D3 really talks about the roadway typologies, describes what their different functions are, what kind of features they typically include. It provides some example locations to help place those in your mind, and then also includes some conceptual cross-section drawings to show what kind of features might be included in on a given street type. And so that wraps up the first 4 sections that we're going to be talking about tonight, as well as on September 6th. November 1st, we're going to come to you and present to you what are anticipated to be the types of transportation projects that are going to be needed in the future, both to help the city stay in compliance with its concurrency regulations, making sure that traffic impacts are mitigated. We'll also be talking about non-motorized improvements, and then any other safety improvements that might go along with the transportation projects. When we come to you in January, we'll talk a little bit more about those projects, and we'll talk about them through the lens of what's included in the capital facilities plan. They go very much hand in hand. And then when we see you in February, you'll be having your public hearing on this element.
All
So,
right.
oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Now I was going to step in here a second now. Oh, John, are you working hard enough on this? I see you very attentive. So I just had to give you a little bit of a poke there. But
I'm working hard. I'm working very hard.
yes, well, that's good.
Yeah,
So
I got my finger pointing at Alicia. You just can't see it off camera. So
I saw your shoulder move a bit there. So commissioners, do you have some questions up to here?
And this is my second to last slide, so I'm just about done. So I'll wrap it up and then stop talking.
Well, I see they're all eager for you to do the last 2 slides.
Okay, I'll be quick. So for public engagement, the first part of that engagement is going to be the launch of the website. And I don't think I'll get into too many details associated with it, but the city is launching and you might all know this, you might all know more than I do about the updated website that's going to talk about the entirety of the comprehensive plan update, but it's going to include some information about the transportation element. Through the rest of the year, it's really going to focus on providing people with direct links to basically the Planning Commission information, because that's really the heart of what we have for discussion and review right now. And then in January, we will launch an online open house, which will really provide that more formal comment period associated with the element and really give like again a more formal opportunity for people to provide comment. And then in January, John and I and possibly some others are going to be at the hangar to do an in-person drop-in event so that people can stop by, ask us questions, and all of that will be advertised on the website as well. And then this was just my final slide. So it's very funny that you mentioned John in particular, because he's the person to call with questions on the staff side. So that concludes my presentation for this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Okay, so are there any questions for Alicia? I know John doesn't want any questions, but for Alicia, please. I know you're all very interested and just dying to ask a question. Maybe not. Oh, thank you, Commissioner Nathan.
I had a quick question, and this has to do with water transportation and its relationship with our goals here. I know you mentioned the opportunity or kind of the policy in the future of keeping the option open for a water taxi or water travel in that regard. But when goal 5 came up about maintaining the availability of safe air travel services, I was curious to know if there was the potential for a goal that would meet that, or the addition of another goal for water travel as well. I know that Kenmore has a marina in its city limits, and there's a lot of boaters that come in and out, both private, recreational, leisure style things, as well as commercial. We have that barge that sits out there every once in a while. So I was curious to know why that may not have been included in the safe or in the same sort of capacity as, say, air, when it's still a significant part, and maybe a little bit more kind of discussion on that point.
Sure. So there are two pieces of that. So I think I'll talk about what I think is maybe the easier piece. So the first part is from the transportation side is talking about a water taxi, foot ferry, something like that, that is currently under discussion with King County Metro. That would be the provider for that. On the marina side of things, though, I think that that's a conversation that possibly has overlap with possibly parks and recreation, or also your shoreline management policies and plans. So I don't know that that is necessarily, I understand what you're talking about as far as it is a form of transportation, but I'm not sure that that's exactly the right place for something like discussion of a marina in the transportation element. More than happy to dive into those details a little bit more, but I don't know if John or Debbie, you have any other thoughts about how that might be discussed?
The specific question about, private use of privately owned boats as a means of transportation hasn't come up. And I think the question then is, these are private marinas and they're not necessary, so the question is, what are people just going out on the lake, or are they actually using them to go from A to B as a form of transport, or is it just sort of recreation? And I think it would be very difficult to establish that. For one thing, is to kind of figure out then how many people have boats at the marine and how many people are actually using them as a form of transportation rather than just recreation. So again, I think it would be hard to get data to justify it being sort of an important mode of travel, which is probably why it hasn't been done before. And secondly, I think something like a marina is sort of more in the land use side as a use rather than a mode of transportation. That's just my initial opinion.
Thank you. I guess my thinking was, it seems like it could be easier in discussing the water taxi if there was a specific goal associated to water transportation, as there is for air travel. And I brought that up because besides just private use, there also is the commercial side as well. And so that's kind of where my thinking was at that point.
And the discussion of the water taxi does fall under goal 4. So within goal 4, there's an objective, and it looks at water taxi through the lens of it being a transit service. So it's incorporated into that. So policy T-4.1.3 talks about encourage development and maintaining a passenger ferry, water taxi, or other water-based transportation services on Lake Washington.
Okay, is there any other comments or questions from the commissioners? If not, I have just one question, and at the commission, we have talked about environmental issues and how that will be addressed, because certainly there are significant environmental, and I'm not talking about air pollution, I'm talking about the trees, the water, those kinds of things. So do you have any comments on that, Alicia?
Yeah, so looking in the document, that was part of why we added that draft new goal, talking about supporting transportation investments that minimize, mitigate, and respond to the effects of climate change. So that's where we talk a lot about greenhouse gas emissions. We talk about water quality as well, and then use of expanded use of transit, and then we talk about water quality in other areas of the document, as well as air quality in other parts of the goals and objectives. I do not believe that we included anything about tree retention as part of the policies. However, when you talk about the street development toolkit, it does talk about implementation of stormwater infrastructure, low impact development, like green stormwater infrastructure. It also talks about including landscaping and trees in the street cross sections. So that's where those pieces are discussed. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. So what shall we do next? Debbie, John, I wouldn't want to disturb you, John, but do we have anything further?
Well, no, we thought this was rather sort of a meaty topic, so we wanted to kind of give you that, and maybe if you need more time to think of questions, you can certainly provide questions now between any time now to John that come up after you've had maybe more time to digest the information. But yeah, that was really all we had on your agenda this evening.
Well, I feel as though I look at my fellow commissioners and they took some Tums and they're working on the digestive. This is in the digestive tract. So I have a feeling that now that you did such a good presentation, Alicia, there's going to be a lot of thoughtful consideration and looking at the materials that was provided to us and to the public tonight. Again, I'd like to remind the public that this is being recorded and you can listen to it again, to Alicia's detailed presentation. I don't know if the slides will be on the website for us, Debbie.
I'll ask Alicia or John to email us that slide, and then I'll have Rita attach it to the Planning Commission agenda for tonight. So that will be where you will be able to find it.
All right. And we can also put it on the minutes so that it will be in the book forever.
And our goal is to take a lot of the information that Alicia shared and put it on the new website that we're putting together, the Bang the Table. So you'll be able to find a lot of the same information. It may not necessarily be the same format, but a lot of that same information will be found there once we get that site up and running here soon.
And appreciate that. But I'm also concerned about the public and our residents, because we kind of deal with this stuff and jump through the hoops and are more familiar how to find things. But our citizens might find it a little more difficult to find it through all of the details that you have done in your presentation, Alicia, which was, we all appreciate it. And I'm sure some of the other members might chime in on that. So is there any discussion that anybody, any particular topic, or are we just digesting this and we'll come back to it? Because Debbie's not saying that we have to do anything tonight. Otherwise, we would probably have to do it. You know, the whip is, you know, there's a whip back in the back of her room there that she has. It says Planning Commission whip. And I don't see her reaching for it.
Don't know quite what to say to that. So I think, no, this was not an action meeting. This was sort of presenting the information and particularly highlighting the changes that were being incorporated since the last update. So I would sort of say, if you're looking through the material, sort of look at it with the lens of what has changed, and then think about, is there anything missing? And those are sort of the way to sort of look at it when you're thinking about this. There is a lot of detail, but if I have a big document like this is how I would tend to look at it to sort of help start generating maybe some specific questions.
Okay, how's that sound to everybody? Well, I see a lot of thumbs up and nodding yes.
So I would say, Alicia, if you were looking for comments or questions, ideally, when would you like to receive those? So we can maybe set some sort of parameters here.
I would say, how about, is Friday of next week too soon to ask for that? We want to make sure that we provide, I'll ask you, I'll ask the commission, you know, would you like to have responses in advance? Because that way we would need, you know, the time to prepare those responses and then put them in the memo, et cetera. And as I had mentioned, you know, possibly do a strikeout underline version of the draft that you have now, so you can see those responses. So if that was the case, that's where my mind goes to a week from this Friday. So it's second, third, fourth, fifth, the 12th, I believe. And that will give us time to coordinate with John and Lori, making sure that all of the responses, we're answering the questions, but also that we're not in conflict with any other sections of the comprehensive plan. So just making sure that everything's coordinated. And that way we can have things ready for that next packet. Might be a quick turnaround. John, I hope you're here. You're not on vacation at that time. But that would be my preference. If it's something that you don't need an answer to, and we can go through those changes and responses at the meeting, a little more on the fly, then we can let a little more time go by.
So generally, my experience with this commission is on this new detailed topic. We generally like to go over certain concerns that each commissioner may bring up and discuss them before we throw it at you to respond, because we may have an easy response, like this is how it's handled, and everybody nods like we did tonight, or we don't nod, and then you know what you need to, you know, respond to and what our concerns are. So what's the commission's desire, to do this individually, or bring your thoughts to a commission meeting and then whittle them down? Nathan?
I'm a fan of bringing our thoughts to the commission meeting, because I know, at least for myself, some of the questions and points that my fellow commissioners bring up are things that really get the gears turning for myself. And if we all send questions individually, I don't know how many of those are going to be repetitions, and I won't be able to see and kind of bounce off of those points. Plus, I like having that back and forth dialogue with our esteemed consultants and city staff here, because sometimes it's a simple answer, and sometimes, it takes a little bit of talking through to really get that point across, that sometimes I don't know if I can get that across in a written up question, no matter how hard I try. So that's what I'm personally in favor of, but I'd like to hear what others think.
I see, Christiana, I saw you nodding up and down, so now you raised your hand, so it's your turn.
I second what Commissioner Lutzis has to say. Strongly.
Well, that was short and simple. That's good. Any other comments from other commissioners? Thumbs up, thumbs down on what Nathan suggested? Oh, I see. Oh, is that a thumbs up, Derek, or is that a I want to talk, Derek?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I prefer to talk over writing every time.
All right.
So if I could just maybe ask Alicia then, so if now that you're not providing comments in advance, and this is then, we'll need to at least know what you want to talk about, because it's very hard to answer everything on the fly if you're going to be asking a lot of detailed questions, or then the expectation is to provide more information back. So I'm trying to balance this in terms of keeping this project on track, giving you enough time. There are other topics that you also have to discuss. So I would say, even if I don't want you to write a lot, but even if there was a way to sort of say, I'd like to chat more about this section, I have questions about ABC, that at least would give Alicia and John an opportunity to be a little bit more prepared for the meeting. And not to say then that at the meeting, you could broaden that discussion to anything else. So I just throwing that out there.
I see the whip is off back. Okay, folks, what do you think, my fellow commissioners, on that? So what she's saying is you don't have to get into detail. What she's really looking for is the topics that you might be interested in, and not necessarily have to ask questions, but so that Alicia would be more prepared to do that. Commissioner Marielle.
I think that's fine. I think the one thing I would appreciate that if in our correspondence and putting out those points or kind of general questions, if we can maybe copy each other, so that way we kind of know what is being brought up. I know that I would find that helpful just for my own thinking and preparation for the conversation.
So under the Open Meetings Act, what we should do is send them to Lori, correct, Debbie?
I'm thinking it might be sending them to John.
Okay, that's fine. And then John, you have to turn around and send them out to all of us. Or you can do it as you get them, whatever you folks at the staff figure out. But the Open Meetings Act has a certain requirement, so that's how we have done it in the past, because Debbie has insisted, and I think it's a good idea, because Open Meetings Act on these kinds of things it's a big deal. So John, are you up for it?
I'll sure give it the old college try.
Right, there he is.
You'd be amazed at the quality of staff that I get to work with. It will keep me out of trouble. So,
oh, that's wonderful.
So
is that okay with the commission?
my recommendation would be, so we can help facilitate your conversation, is maybe use those 4 headings that we talked about this evening when we're talking about the element, the introduction, the existing conditions, the goals, objectives, and policies, and then the future transportation system. And as those comments come in, maybe we can kind of bundle them together so that we can help move the conversation through each section. And then I just want to remind the commission, don't worry about the last two sections. There's a lot of blanks in there, and that's deliberate. They're all placeholders in the near term and long-term capital project sections, as well as the implementation strategies. Those we'll get into a little bit more in November. So there's two whole sections you don't have to worry about for the next 4 weeks.
So I believe an engineer is very good at putting things together. So how does that sound to the commissioners? One hand, two. Nathan, and three, Mariel. Okay, everyone's happy with that. So that's what we're going to do. And Debbie or John, could you just send us an email summarizing what was just done and said?
Sure.
Okay, great. So that and we also agree that we can still bring up any other topic that we wish to during the discussion. So having said that, unless somebody has something more to say on this topic, I will now turn to John and Debbie if they want to add anything else for the good of the city tonight.
I don't have anything on the transportation part. I can give you an update on how the council discussion on the comp plan went. So there were a few minor changes on the comp plan element. So the discussion of we had 2 meetings with the council. So the first meeting was on the comprehensive plan, everything except missing middle. The second meeting was on specifically missing middle, which was a very interesting conversation. And the end result being is that the council direction was to expand duplexes and triplexes to the entire R6 zone. That was the direction. So we will be coming back to council in September to present sort of a preliminary draft of those changes based on the direction. And then would be shooting for a public hearing and ordinance adoption in October. In addition, the city applied and received a grant from the Department of Commerce for to look at missing middle housing. So we will be putting out a request for proposal to hire a consultant to then take a look at missing middle housing types. And the grant requires you take a look at the full spectrum of the missing middle housing types and where appropriate locations would be in the city throughout the entire, well, it's definitely in the R6 zone, and also then taking a look at the R1 and R4 zone. So that's what the consultant would be doing. The grant does not require ordinance adoption. There was definitely interest from the council in cottage housing regulations. So that might be something that the consultant takes a look at. So that's basically a summary of council direction.
Commissioner Christiana.
After having watched the council meeting, are we as a city going to continue to use the terminology missing middle when in fact what is happening is not missing middle technically, as opposed to, you know, what the missing middle is designed to do? Because I do think that that is very confusing to the council. I also think it's very confusing to the residents who the council represent. There has been a lot of conversations via social media and other areas that don't seem to understand the direction. So I'm not sure how to solve that, but is there a way that we can rename it? Because it is not missing middle as defined by what the missing middle really is.
I'm not, well, I don't know how to respond to that because I think that missing middle includes a range of housing types from duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, up to sixplexes, cottage housing. So that is the range of missing middle housing types.
Mhm. Designed to be in walkable areas. And that's for the definition for the gentleman who actually coined the term.
Right. So again, as part of the look at this, when we hire a consultant, that would be then for them to sort of take a look at where these different kinds of in the range of missing middle housing would be appropriate and where that recommendation would come. In terms of public confusion about what the council recommendation is, we'll obviously have to do some additional outreach to the public before this comes back to the council. So that's something that, haven't actually got a full plan yet of what that will look like, but we do recognize that is then will be needed because now the recommendation, the direction is a little different than the Planning Commission recommendation. So do recognize there will need to be more public outreach.
Is there further questions? Are there further questions? Excuse me. Well, see none. Is there anything for the good of the order? Our next meeting is in 2 weeks, correct, Debbie? And it will be hopefully a what do you call it, a blend between in-person and virtual still?
It should be. This was this evening that the voter registration has taken up the council chambers. So this is how we worked it out for this evening to keep this meeting without having to cancel it. Yes, your next meeting is August 16th, and Laurie will be at that meeting along with Mike Stanger to continue the discussion of transit-oriented development regulations.
All right, then. If there is no further topics, I call this meeting adjourned. Okay, now look at that, 5 minutes after 8 for the record.
That's great.
That has to be a record.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you. Have
night.
a good evening.
All right.
Bye.